Hello everyone. Welcome to First Online University, a global platform for all your education and growth related needs. In this lecture, we are going to start with a new chapter that is biomolecules. And here in this lecture, we'll be focusing mainly on the introduction to what is biomolecule and what are the various biomolecules that we are going to talk about. And then we are going to start with carbohydrates. Their classification basically is what will be covered in this particular lecture. Now, before we begin, a piece of information for you. You can use the coupon codes Mission JEE or Mission NEET while you enroll at First Online University for Mission JEE or NEET in order to avail good discounts. Now, when we talk about biomolecules, see, biomolecules is a very interesting chapter and it is interesting because it not only involves chemistry, but it involves daily life chemistry. Okay, it involves our bodies, it involves what we eat. So, everything that we have around us or that we have within us and the chemistry that is associated with such molecules which are biologically important is what we study under biomolecules. So this is, I personally find this chapter to be very interesting, and also at the same time you do not have to cram things. Okay, biomolecules is not a chapter where you will have to learn things by heart. If you simply understand what is happening, what is the chemical reaction taking place, how is that particular substance getting assimilated in the body, what are the end products that are getting produced when we have that substance being assimilated, what is the structure of that particular molecule, how is it actually providing us energy, what is its use, what is its function, everything that is, that is very very informative. Actually, it will give you a lot of knowledge about what is around you, what you eat, and every possible knowledge that a chemistry student must have is what is going to be provided here. So an introduction to biomolecules, let us just quickly begin with it. Now, when we talk about our food, as I told you, this is very interesting. You only have to understand things in this chapter. You do not have to cram anything. Just that you will have to, practice writing a few reactions. Otherwise, this chapter is going to be a very interesting and understandable chapter. And it's very scoring also. When you get, some 2 or 3 questions from this chapter, like whatever amount, it depends on the examiner, but you definitely get like 2 questions at least from this chapter, and these questions are very very scoring because these are simply either memory based questions or some simple common sense that you have to apply by looking at the things around you, etc. And the way you can, that way you can easily solve these questions, and these are also time saving questions. Now, when we talk about biomolecules, so if we like separate these two terms which are present in this one particular word, bio obviously comes from biological system, and molecules are the chemistry molecules normally. So, biomolecules, when we say biologically important molecules, is what is uh, are what we are going to discuss in this particular chapter. So, when we talk about the food that we consume, we have got in the food, we have got biomolecules. Now these biomolecules are basically, cell organelles. We have studied animal cell and plant cell, and we have organelles present in them. Now these cell organelles are going to be present inside the cell. The cell is going to form. So when we talk about biomolecules, basically biomolecules are the cell part of, like, you can say biomolecules are present within cell organelles. Cell organelles make up the cells, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, and organs together make up the living organism or the whole body. Okay, this is how important biomolecules are. Now, the general biomolecules that our food contains, what are the various biomolecules which are present in the food are carbohydrates, amino acids, proteins, nucleic acids, vitamins, and hormones. Now, let us first begin with carbohydrates. Now, when we talk about carbohydrates, okay, you do not have to think about carbohydrates. Okay, what is carbohydrates? You consume chapatis, rice, bread, potato, okay? All these have got carbohydrates in them. Okay, carbohydrates are a very, very good form of energy. Banana has a lot of carbohydrates, but at the same time, it has got, that is why, sometimes if you have someone or if you yourself go to gym, you are, you know, asked to either, take up uh, one banana or two banana before going to the gym, that is because it is an instant source of energy because it has got a lot of carbohydrates that is going to provide you energy. Okay, but carbohydrates obviously have to be taken in one particular quantity because beyond that they will start affecting your body. Anything in excess is going to be bad for you. Similar is the case with carbohydrates also. But in general, the food that we eat, anything sweet that you're eating, anything like I've already told you, chapati, rice, potato, anything that has got some starch in it, all these are containing good amounts of carbohydrates. So, carbohydrates are primarily produced by plants and they form a very large group of naturally occurring organic compounds. Some examples include sugarcane, okay? Then you also have glucose, starch, etc. Then, looking closely at the term carbohydrates, it is made up of carbo, that means it has a carbon, and hydrates means it has got water molecules present in it. So that means we have carbon plus water. So simplest ratio is going to be C ratio H ratio O. That is carbon ratio hydrogen ratio oxygen. And that is 1 ratio 2 ratio 1. So carbon and oxygen are going to be present in 1 ratio 1, and with respect to that, hydrogen is present in double the amount. Now, taking some examples of carbohydrates, if I talk of glucose, glucose is C6H12O6. The molecular formula, as you can see, you will have 6 ratio 12 ratio 6, and if you cancel it with 6, you will have it to be equal to 1 ratio 2 ratio 1. So, in terms of water, we can write it as glucose to be C6H2O whole 6, right? Now, again, taking one more example, when we talk about sucrose, the molecular formula of sucrose is basically C12H22O11. So, 12, 22, 11. So, see, oxygen here. So, if we write down like in the form of water, so that would be like C12H2O whole twice. Whole 11, right? So that means we will have C12H22O11 and approximately carbon and oxygen are in 1 ratio 1 and hydrogen is in double the amount. So here we can see that since they are satisfying the simplest ratio and also since they are satisfying this carbohydrate stuff, that is carbon and water, therefore these are called as carbohydrates. Or we can also call them as hydrates of carbon. Thus, the general formula can be written as CxH2O whole Y. Now, X and Y need not be same. Okay. Here, X is equal to Y or X not equal to Y. The most common sugar which we use in our homes, chini is what you call it. So, the white sugar that you're using at your home, or even if it's brown sugar, it is containing the biomolecule sucrose. That is C12H22O11. The sugar which is present in milk is called as lactose. Okay, it's the milk sugar itself, not the sugar that you are adding to milk. It's not like the sugar. Sugar when you add it to milk, it will be called as lactose and not sucrose. No, we're not talking about that sugar. That sugar is sucrose only, but the sugar which is naturally present inside milk is known as lactose. Exceptions are always there. So if we talk about acetic acid, chemistry is all about exceptions, right? So when we talk about acetic acid is also satisfying this formula of being a hydrate of carbon, that is, it is CH3COH, but it is not a carbohydrate. On the other hand, when I talk of raffinose does not satisfy this formula. Okay, that is C18H32O16, but it is a carbohydrate. It indicates that all the compounds which fit into this formula may not be classified as carbohydrates. Example, acetic acid. Now let's quickly have a look at few MCQs before we move on to the classification of carbohydrates. The compound that deviates from carbohydrates classification: glucose, sucrose, fructose, or acetic acid. So yes, glucose, sucrose, fructose are examples of carbohydrates, but acetic acid, although has the formula, satisfies the formula of carbohydrates, but it is not a carbohydrate. So option D is the correct answer. Next, we move on to the classification of carbohydrates. Part 1 is what we are going to take up. First, Now, carbohydrates are also known as saccharides. Remember that the other name for carbohydrates is hydrates of carbon, or another name is saccharides because it comes from a Greek word saccharon, which means sugar. Now, if we classify saccharides, we can classify into monosaccharides, oligosaccharides, polysaccharides. Now, when we talk about monosaccharides, so remember that carbohydrates are called as saccharides. So wherever this monosaccharides or disaccharides, polysaccharides, oligosaccharides, all this comes into picture. Remember, saccharides means carbohydrates. So whenever this saccharides term comes in front of you, we are talking about carbohydrates. You should it should just click into your mind and you should be able to solve the question instantly. Now, when we talk about monosaccharides, a carbohydrate that cannot be further hydrolyzed. Hydrolysis means to break down in the presence of water. Now, what happens with these carbohydrates is the moment they are going to react with water, they will break down into simpler complexes or compounds. But monosaccharides are those carbohydrates which will not undergo hydrolysis further to give simpler units of polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketone. Now, what do we mean by polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketone? You will look at the structures and the formula for these compounds, that is polyhydroxyaldehydes or polyhydroxyketones, when we actually represent the reactions of hydrolysis of these saccharides. But as of now, if you look at it, polyhydroxy means there are multiple OH groups. Aldehyde means there is a CHO group, or it could be a ketone, that is, there is a C double bond O group present. But hydroxyl groups are going to be in multiple quantity. So that carbohydrate which will not further, get broken down or hydrolyzed into simpler units of polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones are known as monosaccharides, and about 20 monosaccharides are known to occur in nature. For example, glucose, fructose, ribose, these are all monosaccharides. Next, we move on to oligosaccharides. Now, those carbohydrates which are going to, there is also this category of disaccharides, which are like carbohydrates which will break down into two monosaccharide units on hydrolysis. We call them as disaccharides. But disaccharides are also coming under the category of oligosaccharides only. Now, what are oligosaccharides? Those carbohydrates which on undergoing hydrolysis are going to break down into simpler units. We call these units as monosaccharides only, and these are going to be like 2 to 10 in number. Okay. And then they are further classified, as I told you, into disaccharides, tetrasaccharides, etc., depending upon the number of monosaccharides units that are produced upon hydrolysis. For example, if I talk of sucrose, that is actually a disaccharide because when it undergoes hydrolysis, it gives me 1 unit of glucose and 1 unit of fructose. Similarly, when I talk about maltose, it is again a disaccharide because it gives me 1 unit of glucose and another unit of glucose. So we're getting 2 units of glucose. Now, here we'll not call maltose as a monosaccharide because, just because it is giving us one same unit, that is glucose, but we see that it is breaking down into 2 units. So wherever it is breaking down on hydrolysis, we will call this as a disaccharide or whatever, oligosaccharide only. So maltose on hydrolysis is going to yield 2 units of glucose. Next, we move on to what are polysaccharides. Now, carbohydrates which are going to yield a large number of monosaccharide units on hydrolysis are known as polysaccharides. For example, starch, cellulose, glycogen, gums, all these are examples of polysaccharides. Now, the monosaccharides can be further classified, okay, based on the number of carbon atoms and the various functional groups that are present. So we can have, so if we see the number of carbon atoms, the general term we use for them, and whether it has aldehyde or ketonic group. So if the number of carbon atoms are 3, it will be called as a triose. Tri means 3, ose is used for like fructose, glucose. You see this OSE. OSE is used for these sugars only, that is carbohydrates only. Then if it is an aldehyde, it will be called as aldotriose. If it is a ketone, it will be called as ketotriose. Then if we have 4, it is tetrose and aldotetrose and ketotetrose. If it is 5, it will be pentose, aldopentose and ketopentose. 6 means hexose, aldohexose or ketohexose. 7 means heptose, then it would be aldoheptose or ketoheptose. Now, based on what we have studied in part 1 of the classification of carbohydrates, let's just quickly have a look at few MCQs. The first question is, ribose is a monosaccharide, disaccharide, oligosaccharide, or polysaccharide. So we've already seen ribose, glucose, fructose, all these are monosaccharides. So option 1 is the correct answer. That is A. Next question is, polysaccharide is glucose. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Sucrose is a disaccharide. Starch, yes. Fructose is again a monosaccharide. So option C is going to be the correct answer. Next, we move on to the classification of carbohydrates part 2. Okay. Now, when we talk about the classification of carbohydrates based on the functional group that is present, we can also classify, functional group would be either aldehyde or ketone. Then we can also classify on the basis of taste and solubility and on the nature of reaction. So based on functional group, chemically, carbohydrates may be defined as optically active polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones, or the compounds which produce such units on hydrolysis. So chemically, functional groups, for example, if we talk about glucose, it has the molecular formula C6H12O6. What its structure would be like, so we have 6 carbon atoms in a vertical row. The first carbon atom is actually an aldehyde group, and the sixth carbon atom is primary alcohol, which is CH2OH. But the middle 4 carbon atoms are going to have OH groups attached to them, but these are going to be secondary alcohols. But at the same time, you will have to be very careful about the position of OH. So we have the last two, the second last carbon and the third last carbon will have OH on the right hand side, then the middle carbon on the left hand side, and above again on the right hand side. So all of the OH are on the right hand side except for on the third carbon. This is how you can learn, and the rest of the positions or valencies are going to be satisfied by the presence of hydrogen. So these 4 carbon atoms are secondary alcohols. Now here glucose is basically, the first, there is one aldehyde group present and there are alcoholic groups present. Okay, so it would be called as polyhydroxy because there are various hydroxyl groups present, and since there is one aldehyde group present, so it would be polyhydroxyaldehyde. So glucose is an example of polyhydroxyaldehyde. When we talk about fructose, C6H12O6, again the same molecular formula. But when we look at the structure of fructose, instead of the first carbon having an aldehyde group, the second carbon is a ketonic group. And the first and the last carbons are basically having the OH groups, which is primary alcohols, and the in between 3 carbon atoms are secondary. Again, here the position of OH, all the OH are going to be on the right except for the OH on the third carbon atom. And the rest of the valencies are going to be satisfied by hydrogen atoms. So if we see here that, fructose is going to be polyhydroxy ketone because here we have the ketonic group present along with the various hydroxyl groups that are contained in it. Now let us take the example of sucrose, for example. So if we have sucrose, sucrose is going to be hydrolyzed, and on hydrolysis it will give me 1 unit of glucose, which is polyhydroxyaldehyde. We call it as PHA, polyhydroxyaldehyde, and 1 unit of fructose, which is polyhydroxyketone or PHK. Okay, therefore sucrose is a disaccharide. Then based on taste and solubility of the groups that are present, we can have sugars or non-sugars. So all the carbohydrates are not called as sugars. Some are sugars and some are non-sugars. Now what are the properties on the basis of which we can actually classify them into two? Sugars are going to be crystalline, sweet to taste obviously, and they are going to be soluble in water. If you dissolve the sugar in water, it gets completely dissolved and you get a sugar solution, right? When we talk about the properties of non-sugars, instead of being crystalline, they are amorphous, and also they are tasteless. They are not sweet, and they are insoluble in water. So you can see completely different properties. Then based on the nature of the reaction that is involved, We can have reducing sugars or non-reducing sugars. Now, reducing sugars are going to reduce. Reducing sugars means they can reduce something. What do they reduce? They reduce the Fehling solution and tolerance reagent. We'll study about these reactions, don't worry. So they reduce Fehling solution and tolerance reagent, and they're all monosaccharides like glucose, fructose, etc. Disaccharides in which there is an aldehyde group present and ketonic group that is present, and they are free. Only those disaccharides in which the aldehyde and ketonic groups are free are going to be called as reducing sugars. Now, what are an example includes maltose and lactose as the disaccharides which are going to be called as reducing sugars. Then we have non-reducing sugars. Non-reducing sugars are not going to reduce Fehling's solution and tolerance reagent, and those disaccharides in which the aldehydic or ketonic group present is not free, or you can say they are bonded, they are known as non-reducing sugars. For example, sucrose. Okay, sucrose is a non-reducing sugar. So remember the examples of reducing sugar: maltose and um, that of non-reducing sugar is sucrose. So although right now you do not have to, again, as I told you, biomolecules, you do not have to learn anything. It's only that with practice, you will learn the structures of all these sugars and non-sugars, all these monodisaccharides that we are talking about. So once you learn these, once you practice these structures, actually, these get fit in your mind, and once you have the structures in your mind, you do not have to learn any of these properties. You can simply use your common sense to answer these questions. Supposedly, you know the structure of sucrose. Will you be able to tell whether it is reducing or non-reducing? Very easily you can tell, because if you know the structure, you will know that the aldehydic group present in it or the ketonic group present in it is not free. It is bonded. And since it is bonded, it is going to be a non-reducing sugar. Okay. Now, based on this, let's quickly have a look at few MCQs. Chemically, carbohydrates are hydroxycarbonyl compounds, alcoholic compound, or polyhydroxycarbonyl compounds. So, yes, it is hydroxycarbonyl, but there are many hydroxyl groups present. So, it is polyhydroxycarbonyl compound. Option D is the correct answer. Next question is the simplest ratio of carbon and hydrogen in carbohydrates. So carbon and hydrogen are basically 1:2. Option D again is the correct answer. So this is all that we had to cover in the introduction of biomolecules. I hope you found it interesting. The entire chapter is very, very interesting. If you carefully and attentively attend all these lectures and make your notes simultaneously, because in this particular chapter, I would say towards the end, your notes are going to be very, very helpful, because when you revise the notes, you will revise everything that has been taught to you in the class. You do not have to learn anything. You just have to understand and use your common sense. Okay. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel for joining YouTube live classes for best NEET or JEE coaching. You can also download the First Online University mobile app through Google Play Store or App Store for continuous learning through your smartphones. Keep learning with First Online University, a team of millions of learners and educators worldwide.